Hey guys, welcome back. It's Chris from Green Bench Brewing Company here. We are on Module 6, Fermentation Technologies. And the first slides we're going to go through is the fermentation systems. So let's get started. Okay, so in the fermentation systems, we'll talk about cylindroconical fermenters, top skimming systems, Yorkshire square systems, fooder fermenters, and the required reading will be in the Brewer's Handbook, Chapter 3, Beer Fermentation, Fermentation Systems. All right, so cylindroconical systems. This is by far the most commonly used fermenter. Cylindroconical or conical fermenters, they are cylinder tanks with a conical bottom and a closed dome on top. It's usually made completely of stainless, and the conical bottom is ideal for yeast collection. So the sort of cone on the bottom allows the yeast to drop, and you can collect yeast there. It's usually why they're designed that way. Cylindroconical systems, we'll say, just to talk about what they have usually. Standard conical fermenters include manway door for inspection, yeast pitching, fermentation additions, etc. So you can open the manway door, get in there, you check, make sure you're clean, all sorts of stuff, add yeast, add fermentation stuff before you transfer into it, whatever. PRV, or pressure release valve, to maintain certain pressure on the tank so you can't go too high. CIP, or clean in place, which is what that stands for. Spray ball, which is attached to an arm that extends from the top of the dome down the side of the fermenter and can be used for blow off during fermentation. So you can allow the pressure to come off, the positive pressure of fermentation. A racking arm in the cone, which is used to transfer off of the yeast shrub, yeast and/or shrub that falls to the bottom of the cone. So you can use the racking arm to pull the wort off of the dropped yeast. So the dropped yeast will fall down the bottom of the cone. The racking arm, you can grab the wort or the beer on top of the yeast. You're not pulling yeast off the bottom. A bottom port for dropping yeast and trub, collecting yeast, pitching yeast, filling the fermenter, etc. Anything you need to put in the bottom or take out in the bottom. A sampling port, a pressure gauge. So sampling and take samples, pressure to make sure you can see what the pressure is of the tank itself. A thermal well, so you can put basically a thermometer in there, digital thermometer that runs through a control panel or one that sits on the tank itself, so you can see what temperature is internal. And then lastly, glycol jacketed, unless it's single walled. So your glycol jacketed, you're gonna have literally two walls. So you have your internal wall, and then there's a jacket that's put there so glycol runs around it, insulation around that, and then a second wall after that, that's how you sort of jacket a tank. Here's a look at a fermenter, just a standard sort of 15 barrel. This is the same one. This one we have. So the middle there is a manway door on the left. See, it's pointing to it. Then we have our PRV, which is hanging off the PRV line, the arm. We have a sampling port. You can see a Zwickel. It's got a little black right here. See that there? It's got like a little black knob. You can kind of spin it. It opens up, lets the wort come out. Our bottom port here on the bottom. Here's our racking arm. So this guy spins and it allows you to collect anywhere you want, sort of from the inside. There's our pressure gauge, which is right here. And then this arm right here that goes up is a CIP. So it's got a spray ball on the inside. In addition to that, on this one, which is on here, there's actually another PRV up here on the top. And then this is also a big port, a 4-inch port you can open up and pour like hops in if you're dry hopping or biofine or whatever you need to add to the sort of fermenter. All right, top skimming systems. So this is an interesting sort of technique, otherwise known as an open fermenter. A top skimming system is usually rectangular, square, or round with an open top. Traditionally, top skimming was the method in which you collected yeast. It was the system that we all had. It was the way you cropped ale yeast that was then repitched in the next batches. It was the traditional way of doing it. Although not any more widely used, there are still some breweries that use open fermenters, and they make very unique beers and very clean and nice beers. So it is a really cool technique. Here's a cool little picture of a brewer at Sierra Nevada top cropping yeast from an open fermenter. So pulling, they have like a few of these at Sierra Nevada. They're Kellerweiss in this thing. So the brewer top cropping yeast from an open fermenter. They use this big spoon like rake thing, and they rake the yeast through this slide here. That's like kind of up here. You can kind of see it down there on the bottom. And it just falls down into sort of vessels, and then they repitch that into something else. That's how you collect the yeast. So there is also a Yorkshire system. Yorkshire square fermenters, very traditional old world kind of way of fermenting, and there's still some breweries that actually do it, which is fairly unique. They're short tanks, very, very short tanks, that have a small opening on the top. So imagine this big vessel, and then it kind of comes to a hole in the top. But it's short. The vessel is not like, there's not a bunch of headspace. It's very short and shallow. So what happens is where this hole is, there's a big chamber that's there. So as the beer ferments and the yeast sort of rises in what's called High-Krausen, the yeast will come out of, that top yeast will come out of that hole into this chamber, and it gets collected in this chamber. The yeast will then, or the brewers will collect the yeast that's in the chamber, and that's they use to repitch. So as I say here, Yorkshire fermenters are short tanks that have a small opening on the top where an open chamber sits. The top fermenting yeast during fermentation collects into the open chamber where brewers can collect and reuse it in the next batches. Foeder fermenters. So foeders, sometimes spelled foeders, which is the French term is the R-E, and the sort of original Dutch is F-O-E-D-E-R, are oak fermenters that are traditionally used in winemaking. Foeder itself means a giant oak vessel, a large oak vessel. The first beer fermenters were all made of wood, however. With the progression of technology, not many breweries still use oak fermenters. So this is not common practice. This is not usual. Most breweries will just use stainless tanks. You can clean them. You can make sure they're spotless and not worry about sort of the stainless harboring any sort of microorganisms, as wood definitely can. So not used as often anymore. So these days, most breweries use foeders for sour beer fermentation. It's a large oak vessel that allows the breweries to make large volume batches of sour beer rather than using individual barrels. So using individual barrels, you have little chambers by themselves. It takes up a lot of space. There's a lot of blending required, and each barrel doesn't make a whole lot of beer. You're talking 50 to 60 gallons per barrel, whereas a foeder will allow you to make a giant, large volume batch of a sour beer. Some breweries have begun using foeders as traditional fermenters and not for sour beer production. For example, at my brewery, this is the foeder at Green Bench Brewing Company. It was the first of its kind. I had this foeder custom built and designed for 100% oak fermentation farmhouse ales. So all of the beers fermented in what's called our St. Peter's Belgian line, our 100% fermented farmhouse line, goes through this. So we are the first brewery. Green Bench is the first brewery in the Southeast to own a foeder, especially one that's custom built. And so this is it. That is my foeder. You can see we had it custom built. It's got a manway. It's got a bottom port. It's got a side arm here, sampling valve, temperature, thermal well here. These white lines coming down the bottom and the back here actually are insulated glycol lines. So there's a cooling coil on the inside. You know how like in a big stainless fermenter we just mentioned will have jackets. This actually has cooling coils on the inside, so I can run glycol on the inside and maintain temperature. So yeah, that's it for this slide. See you guys in the next one. Thank you.